Somebody convinced me that it was a good idea to get a shot and a Band-Aid on my arm, and today I am feeling sicker than a Dave dog. So I'm gonna try to get through this because I really don't want to lose my spot in line. But this B30 engine really desperately needs a power wash. Sure, I mean, that's a bit of an understatement. You can see a very good use of old gloves. Pull off them fingers, and then they can be used to really seal up a lot of the ports. They are triple sealed, meaning that there's a bolt in each one, there's electrical tape, and there's a glove. Sure, water's going to get in there, but as soon as I finish power washing everything, I'll pull the head off and take off the manifolds and put them off to the side. And then I'm going to pull the camshaft from the front, and we'll see how the bearings look. If it needs cam bearings, for sure. Finances, you know. If it needs cam bearings, then I'm going to take this over and drop it in the back of the car here, send it off to the shop. If they're doing that, they're pulling the whole bottom end apart. So the crank's coming out, and if it doesn't need to be ground and re-bearinged, it'll just get re-bearinged after a polish. While I wait for my sunscreen to dry, I shall remove the spark plugs, put a little MMO in there, a little Marvel Mystery Oil, just to keep water from getting on those rings should there be a breach in the head gasket, which we definitely reused from yesterday. But I think I'll just put a little T-Cat on the Spotify and hang out in my Stars and Stripes do-rag, try to get this thing all cleaned up and spick and span. Well, here I am trying to wash one carbureted engine, and I find myself having to take apart another one. This little guy, for whatever reason, protests too much, so I gotta find out what kind of carburetor, I don't know, figure out what it needs, or what's plugging it up. All right, let's do good news and bad news. Good news is she cleaned up pretty well. Not bad. Literally. Bad news is, ouch, my hands. Good news is, I power washed 3/4 of the driveway. Bad news is, I knew I was gonna have to do it after power washing the underbody of Ivy. But that's just kind of how my distracted brain works, you know? You're in the moment, next thing you know. Yeah, so we'll lay a tarp down or something when it comes time to do the underbody. But for now, just appreciate how she's cleaned up. That intake manifold, whoa, Stucky McDucky. And the rest of it looks pretty okay. I'm sure, but there's water in the cylinders now because of just how much pressure goes through. This thing did a great job. And thank you also to Soren for letting me borrow it. And thank you to Nick for bringing over his, because that little carburetor on the Subaru 2-stroke there, awful. It works, but it was just varnished up, you know. I really wish I could use these manifolds on the carburetors, but I think there is one car, the ones that use a single carburetor over in Europe, they will have a similar looking intake manifold. Okay, so I'm pooped, but I gotta still pull the head off because I wanna make sure those cylinders are happily dried in there before moving on to resting for the night and making more videos. So yeah, pretty happy with this. Great. I'm glad to see that I could take a walk down memory lane and power wash it at the same time, but you gotta be careful, and boy, am I sure glad that I wore safety glasses because I got new freckles, but this thing will exfoliate and create new pores on your face if you get it anywhere near your skin. So stuff gets launched at about, 3,000 PSI. Everything's back in order now. So it's time to pull the head again, which will be rather quick, and put all these fuel injection parts into storage. After a little too much abuse on this front cover, I was really thinking that I might break it in the process, but I finally wised up. Started using the bolts and just wedging some plastic tools behind it. By the way, those plastic tools, I think these are the yellow Harbor Freight ones. They take a huge amount of abuse. I'm super impressed, the quality of that plastic. Yeah, just getting this to slip through the collar is really one turn at a time, and it's run out of bolts, so I'm gonna get a longer bolt or wedge a double spacer in there. Baby love, yes, pardon the mess of tools. We're dealing with a pretty long camshaft here, and we're gonna extract it, trying to not damage any of the bearings as it comes out. The gear, of course, gets damaged when you remove it, because unless you do it with a puller like this, which will take a lot of time, you're just gonna end up hammering the thing to get it out. We're a little hung up on something, and I'm not sure what. I think it's a bearing surface. Oof. Gotta be careful here. Perhaps it was wrong of me to assume the camshaft was not dry. Just gonna have to twist and pull. There we go. It was the front bearing. Whew. This is longer than the Spaceballs starship. I'm gonna set this down on the side, wipe the oil, inspect the lobes. Nice try. And let's just see how she wore. Later today, we'll be able to compare this camshaft to the one that came out of Ivy. Keep in mind the mileage, 135,000 miles on this cam versus Ivy at around 250, I think. That front bearing definitely shows some signs of wear, and it looks like, well, it's hard to determine whether or not that happened from the extraction or from the daily running of the engine. Any attempts to remove it right now would have resulted in scratches going back and forth. I'm looking for the circular scratches as well. There's an oil galley on one side that needs to be aligned. As you look further in the hole,
it's going to be very hard for me to get a visual inspection on that one there.
So my plan right now stands that I'm still wanting a shop to go through and do the work on this engine. I just don't want to go through the cost of replacing the pistons and machining the crank. So this being a later engine with the 8-bolt crank, I still have to figure out the flywheel situation, but I think I can get a little bit more reliability out of a later B30 than an early B30, especially one that was so worn and just completely gummed up. So this is, one, a better candidate for a rebuild, and two, going to hopefully be a cheaper rebuild. The other big Q is the cylinder walls and the rings. It looks like they're okay, but I would like the shop's opinion on whether or not we should re-ring or re-hone or do something else, which I hope it doesn't mean new pistons, but we'll just take it one step at a time. I just don't want to take up the whole year waiting on them for this work. And as they said, it's not the work that's difficult, it's once they get to it, that's when. So I think what I'm going to have to do is order my parts ASAP. Yeah, but I don't want to do it the sloppy mechanic way. I don't want to just, clean up the block and put it all back together and then hope that my cam bearings will last, because replacing the cam bearings, unless I do just the front one, I'd like to get them all replaced, but I don't want to cut any corners and then have it bite me later. So it's going to hurt a little bit now financially, but thanks for the Patreon support and the donations, because they've really helped get this to where it is and keep that momentum going, as I'll continue to say until this build finishes. And then I'm going to send all kinds of postcards out. So here with the lifters, they were a little grimy, and getting them out, I had to kind of lift them with the magnet, and then that dirt ledge right there was just a little too tight for the clearance, so I'd have to grab them with the pliers and wiggle them out. But they came out from the top versus the other ones, which were just impossibly stuck. So these guys all seem to have a really good wear pattern on the bottom. For being a flat tappet cam, it seemed like it was spared a lot of abuse. These probably broke when I was prying some screwdrivers behind the fiber gear, because I knew I was going to trash the gear and I knew that the block wasn't going to get damaged. But this is probably what did it in for the retaining plate, which is fine because I've got another one and I'm going to end up using a puller. Yeah, all the water jackets and water passages on this block seem pretty a-okay. So, yay. Continuing to try to make the job easier for the machine shop and in turn save myself some money, I'm disassembling the bottom end. I've taken off the oil pan and I'm going to leave the crankshaft in place with the main rods and the end caps and all that. Yeah, I'll let them do the inspection, but I'm just going to pull off everything. I took off the oil pump and the O-ring for the pickup tube up there, completely dissolved or in just crumbly plastic fashion. So it's rough. I can check the clearances on the pan with a feeler gauge, or the pump, just to see if it's, still serviceable, or it might need to be replaced. So, with something like that, I figure I'm going through all the trouble. What's another $125? But the bottom end looks pretty okay. You're supposed to have a little bit of wiggle in the rod caps. You can kind of hear that one. And there's the one hole that they punched from the junkyard. And down there's the second hole that they punched in from the junkyard. I don't like that they do that, but that's their standard operating procedure. The lazies, they punch a hole and stuff a plug in there, and then sometimes people put the engines in not knowing that that's what they do. I've had those plugs fall out. Kind of renders the pan useless. This is the little lobe here that drives the fuel pump. Because it's not used on the fuel-injected engine, it's completely blacked up. Not a lot of oil changes done on this little baby. Proud of my seatbelt here from the Kia. Just gonna put her in the trunk of old Beluga after I do a quick oil change and then send it off to the shop. So one more thing that's very important to remove, and I got pretty lucky with it, it's this little sleeve here. This is where the pilot bearing will go, but the automatic cars have this with then a spacer, which is the same bolt pattern, and all of that is used to mount the flex plate and the torque converter. And I'm not using a flex plate or a torque converter, so thankfully I got it out with just a little PB blaster and wiggling. Oh, I love how quickly the weather changes. It's been like maybe 30 minutes, but gotta try to race the storm here and get this off to the shop. Great. Okay, there's Ivy's old engine here, and then there's the other new B30 from the 74. So, woo, we are swapped over, and this is now a core.
Well, it's been a pretty good day. Let me tell you, first of all, wagons, as much as I love them, you wouldn't be able to get an engine in and out easily on a wagon with the longer hatch the way that you can here with just the trunk. That being said, this poor car, I mean, it's already paid itself off just for the utility of getting 1, 2, 3. This is its third engine haul. Let me tell you, my mud flaps are about that much shorter now from all the scraping, but like I said, it's doing its job, and it's been a good day. So I dropped off the other engine at the shop, and they looked at both. It's a father-son business. The father was like, yeah, it's a little inconvenient. The son was like, oh, this looks awesome. It's gonna be a much easier rebuild. So we talked over a little bit, and a couple of points. Never reuse main bearings and rod bearings. So even if you're going to not undersize the crank, you can just replace with standard same dimension bearings. As far as the cylinder walls, a light hone may be all that's needed, but you don't want to reuse the rings, so I'm going to get new rings. Whether or not I get molybdenum rings, or moly for short, that it remains to be seen. Those rings cost a bit, but they're worth it for the coating, which is really good at preserving the cylinder walls. That's the way I understand it. And what else? This engine is now going to be one of two things. It could be a $40 core charge for the other motor, or it could just be a very heavy paperweight that I would later have no way of disposing, so I better get it over to the junkyard. Before I do that, I want to pull the pistons out, which would be mostly for my fun, and two, I also want to see how bad the rod knock damaged cylinder 1. I'm going to strip this down a little bit. I'll pull the oil pump off. I do want to compare the two pumps, just to see how they've both aged and which one has a better tolerance. But I would like a look of the inside of this engine, but I would like to pull the camshaft just to see those worn out lobes. How worn out are they exactly? And then some of the pieces that are good to just keep around, the motor mount brackets, the front and rear main seal attachments. The other big thing on my list this weekend is to pull the windshield on Ivy, because I want to know if it's glued in or if it uses clips. That way I can order correctly with what I've got. We do know it's green. Thanks everybody for chiming in. Also kind of figured it out in the video, but I read all of those comments. I really appreciate the input. Typically I would send the worst head in so that I could have the better head to sell or use as a spare, but it just felt right to give them the better head. Perhaps it'll need less work. We'll see what they tell me once they tear it all down. If they say, no, the valves look perfect, then, you know, we'll just do a 3-angle grind and spruce it up. It's just been a good day. And like I said, the weather changes so quickly. That thunderstorm rolled through and rolled past in just a matter of 90 minutes. It was a lot of fun. I feel pretty good about going with the newer engine. I'm still dealing with a little bit of the challenge of finding an 8-bolt crank flywheel. And the Laplanders, the C303s that use the B30 engine, those seem to have 8-bolt flywheels, and with any luck, there's not going to be any differences the way the clutch bolts up and the distance between the flex plate, the disc, and the flywheel. I think everything should be pretty straightforward. Fingers crossed on that. I need to pull the timing gears on these. I'll send back the B30A head. I won't be disassembling that at all, but I will be sending it out as the core charge. So she's just got to endure, 2 more runs with an engine in the back. This thing needs some drive shaft work. I feel that vibration at low speeds and she is not happy. Sorry, but you know, putting the whale through the ringer. Is that the phrase? Is there a phrase like that? Right, now that I've cleaned the garage and the driveway, let's make it all messy again. I'll bet you never seen one of these in the bottom of an oil pan. That is so disgusting. Blech.